What if the reason we know almost nothing about one of the Roman Empire's most widespread religions is that its own followers made sure of it? For centuries, when a religion disappears from history, we assume the usual story. Someone hunted down the books and burnt them. But look closely at the cult of Mithras, and that explanation falls apart. There's no burned library here, no confiscated scripture, no trial, no purge. So why did soldiers across the entire Roman army worship him? Why did 3 emperors together once call him the protector of their empire, years before Rome ever chose Christ? Why is there a hidden temple, fully intact, sitting under a church a few steps from the Colosseum right now? And after 400 temples and thousands of initiates across 3 centuries, why is there still not one surviving page of what any of them actually believed? This isn't a story about a god who got erased. It's about a god who erased himself. And tonight, we're going down into the one room in Rome that still keeps his silence. To understand how strange that is, you have to understand how big this religion actually was. Archaeologists have found the remains of Mithraic temples, Mithraia they're called, scattered across the entire footprint of the Roman Empire. Britain, Germany, North Africa, Syria. Wherever the legions went, it seems, so did this god. Estimates put the surviving Mithraia worldwide at over 400. One archaeologist who spent years cataloguing them counted roughly 680 in the city of Rome alone. Not just 1 or 2 grand temples, but hundreds of small ones, tucked into basements, converted houses, the undercrofts of bathhouses. And they all look strikingly similar. That's one of the eeriest things about Mithraism, if you actually study the archaeology. No 2 Roman religions were quite as consistent in their architecture as this one. A Mithraium is almost always a small cave-like room, often windowless, lit artificially by lamps even when it could have had natural light. The darkness wasn't an accident of the building, it was the point. Inside, a narrow central aisle runs between 2 raised stone benches where initiates would recline for shared ritual meals. And at the far end, every single time, the same image. A man, Mithras, plunging a dagger into the throat of a bull. A dog and a snake reaching up toward the wound. A scorpion attacking the bull's testicles. Off to the sides, 2 smaller torch-bearing figures, one holding his torch up, one holding it down. Above it all, frequently, the sun and the moon watching. This scene, historians call it the Tauroctony, is carved, painted or sculpted into essentially every Mithraium ever found. From Hadrian's Wall to the banks of the Euphrates, the same god kills the same bull in front of the same small audience, room after room, century after century. And here's the part that should stop you. Nobody today can tell you with certainty what it means. Not because the evidence was destroyed, because it was never written down to begin with. We know a little more around the edges. Initiation, it seems, moved a follower through 7 ranks, each with its own name and probably its own symbolic animal or planet. Raven, bridegroom, soldier, lion, Persian, sunrunner, father. Some Mithraia have star charts carved into their ceilings, suggesting the religion had a serious astrological dimension, a cosmology mapped onto the night sky. Members apparently called each other syndexioi, those united by the handshake, which is a small, oddly intimate detail for a religion this large and this widespread. But ask a modern scholar what any of it actually meant to the people living it, what the bull represented, what happened at each of those 7 ranks, what the initiates believed happened to them after death. And the honest answer is, we're mostly guessing. Educated guessing, built carefully from stone and star charts. But guessing. Because Mithras left almost no one his own account. Here's where this story turns into something different from most vanished religions. Usually, when a belief system disappears from history, there's a villain in the story. Someone burning scrolls, someone stamping out temples, someone actively deciding a people's memory should be erased. And often, that is exactly what happened to other religions across history. That is not, as far as we can tell, what happened here. And that's what makes Mithraism worth understanding on its own terms. The Mithraic cult called itself, in Greek, the Mysteries, from a word mysterion that essentially means the hidden thing. Initiates swore oaths of secrecy as a condition of joining. Whatever theology existed, whatever explanation the priesthood offered for that bull-slaying scene on the wall, it was never meant to leave the room. It's not that outsiders weren't allowed to read it. It's that, as far as modern scholarship can tell, there was almost nothing formally written down for anyone to read in the first place. A few scattered fragments survive, some initiation formulas, a single disputed text scholars call the Mithras liturgy, whose connection to the actual cult is debated, and that is close to the entire written record Mithraism left of itself. Think about what that actually means for a second. In the year 313, when the Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity and the empire's religious balance of power tipped for good, there was no Mithraic scripture left to hunt down and destroy. Not because it had already been burned, because it had never existed to burn. The religion had, in a very real sense, erased itself in advance, the moment its first initiates swore never to write any of it down. So, if you want to know what Mithraism believed, you're left with two kinds of evidence. One is the archaeology, the stone, the star charts, the 600 identical bulls dying in 600 identical rooms. Silent, but honest. It doesn't lie to you. It also doesn't explain itself. The other kind of evidence is worse than silence. It's hostile. Almost everything written about Mithras that survives from antiquity comes from Christian writers, and they weren't documenting the religion, they were attacking it. Around the year 155, a Christian apologist named Justin Martyr wrote that what he called wicked demons had deliberately copied Christian rituals into the cult of Mithras, specifically to confuse and mislead people. Justin describes initiates placing bread and a cup of water on a table during their ceremony, accompanied by certain words spoken over it. And he insists this is a twisted, demonic counterfeit of the Christian Eucharist, meant to make Mithras's followers look like the original and Christians look like copycats. There's something almost funny in a dark way about how that argument works. Justin isn't claiming Mithraism copied Christianity. He's claiming demons copied Christian ritual before Christianity even existed, purely to set a trap. It's the kind of argument you can only make about a religion you can't actually read the holy book of. You can't be proven wrong by a text that was never written. And it gets stranger still. Modern archaeology suggests the bread and cup ritual Justin is describing likely predates his own account by generations. If anything, the timeline runs backward from the accusation. But by the time Justin was writing, nobody could check. Mithras's own side of the story didn't exist to argue back. Tertullian, writing a few decades later, makes the same accusation in a different shape. The devil, he says, deliberately imitates Christian sacraments in pagan cults like this one to confuse the faithful. Between Justin and Tertullian, you have essentially the entire direct literary record of what a Mithraic ritual looked like from the inside. Two hostile witnesses, writing to discredit what they're describing, are the closest thing history has to an eyewitness account. Nothing else survives to argue with them. For most of its life, Mithraism was tolerated, not official, popular with soldiers and merchants, never the empire's chosen religion. Then, for one moment, that almost changed. In 308 AD, at Carnuntum on the Danube frontier, Three of Rome's most powerful men, Diocletian, Galerius, and Licinius, met to settle a succession crisis tearing the empire apart. While they were there, they rededicated an altar to Mithras. The inscription still survives. Deo Soli, Invicto Mithrae, Fautori Imperi Sui, to the unconquered sun god Mithras, protector of their empire. That's not a soldier's private prayer scratched into a barracks wall. That's three emperors, together, naming this god the empire's protector. 5 years later, Constantine legalized Christianity. Within a generation, the empire's religious center of gravity had shifted for good. It's too simple to say one decision flipped a coin, but for a brief window, the smart bet in Rome might genuinely have been Mithras, not Christ. Once Christianity had imperial favor, the funding and protection for cults like this one dried up fast. By the mid-4th century, Mithraea across the empire were being closed, abandoned or converted, their altars broken apart and built into whatever replaced them. That room is under the Basilica of San Clemente. It sat there, forgotten for over 1,000 years, buried under a 4th century church, itself buried under the basilica standing there today. It was rediscovered in 1867 when excavators broke through into the old temple below and found the altar still carved with Mithras and the bull. But the dig nearly stalled immediately. The site kept flooding. It took until 1912 to find out why. An underground river running beneath the floor, so strong that archaeologists eventually built a drainage tunnel over 600 meters long just to keep the site dry enough to study. That's the river you can still hear today, standing in that room. And the handover from temple to church wasn't quiet. The evidence suggests the altar was deliberately broken apart at some point, its pieces later built into the floor of the church that rose above it. Not just abandoned, broken and built over. So here's where that leaves Mithras. He wasn't defeated the way most gods are. No burned library, no scripture anyone had to hunt down and destroy. There was never a book to burn. His own followers made sure of that the moment they chose secrecy over scripture. What survives of him now is almost entirely two things: the silent stone his worshippers left behind and the hostile words of the people who replaced him. For one brief moment, in 308, he stood as close to the center of Roman power as any god ever gets. 5 years later, that window closed for good. The river is still running under that floor near the Colosseum, and the god who silenced himself is still down there, in the only language he ever really spoke,